Let's talk about the Nigerian man of God who got sentenced to death in 2007 after setting 7 members of his church on fire, all because they fornicated. This is a controversial story of Reverend King, not to be mistaken with Reverend Martin Luther King, who is an actual reverend. This particular reverend we're talking about today is nowhere near a freedom fighter. In fact, if anything, he is a big advocate for slavery, and you will get to find that out in a moment. Just stay with me. It's probably going to shock you. So, trigger warning. Pastor King, whose government name is Chukwuemeka Ezugo, was, or should I say, is a notorious religious cult leader who basically rose to fame in 2006 after a big scandal erupted in his church. He was said to be the founder of a religious organization called the CPA, the Christian Praying Assembly, located somewhere in Ajawe Estate in Lagos State, Nigeria. It's not clear when he founded it, but the church probably may have started in the late 90s. It wasn't a big church at the time. Maybe if this scandal did not erupt, he may have probably spread his wings and have many other branches across the country. Thankfully, that did not happen. But regardless of the fact that the church was a small church, it had its following. He was the overseer and basically the king of the church. And for such a small church, this man seemed to have so much power over members of his congregation, up to the point that many of them saw him, or should I say, still see him as his holiness, as next to God, and as perfect. There were rumors that he even called himself God, and this will be revealed in court by the victims he doused with petrol and set on fire. So regarding the popularity of his church, like I've said before, not much was known about the CPA, not much was known about Reverend King. Basically, he wasn't among the top popular churches at the time. So he was just one church in Lagos State that was just running in a private compound. However, in 2006, the fame and the attention that he may have been clamoring for would eventually happen to him in the worst way possible. Not in the way he would have wanted though, but you see, no publicity is bad publicity. Reverend King was known to be in the private business of his church members. It was said that he was so close to them to the point that he knows what was going on in their private lives. In fact, many of them were encouraged to bring their private lives to him, to the church, especially the sinful part of it. I mean, the name of the church is Christian Praying Assembly. It's a prayer-centered congregation. It's a prayer-centered organization. So basically, members of the church were mostly coming to pray and hope that God hears their prayer. And for some reason, he was able to convince them that it was probably only through him that God could hear their prayers, which would mean that you as a member would have to take your personal business to him. He would have to know what you do, what you're not doing, who you're sleeping with, and who you're not sleeping with. And it was said that he had strict rules against sin in his church. And according to him, he did not tolerate evil and he did not tolerate witchcraft, nor did he tolerate sin from his church members. He wanted his church members to be as holy and pure as he was. So basically, the CPA was a no-sin zone. And unlike other men of God who preach forgiveness, more like go and sin no more, Reverend King believed in punishment. He believed in discipline. He believed if you sin, you should be punished for your sins. But the only problem was, who is going to do the punishing? If this man believed that sinners should be punished, yes, okay, I hear you, I agree. But who is going to punish? Who is going to do the punishing? Who is going to do the discipline? When Catholics go for confession, they confess to the Reverend Father. And the Reverend Father hears their sin and hears whatever they had done or they had not done. And he prays with them and tells them to go and sin no more. However, for Reverend King, it was a different story. He made himself the punisher of sinners. Before the tragic event in 2006, it was said that he would hold couples counseling for married couples in his church. And he would listen to their problems. He would listen to the husband. He would listen to the wife. Now, this is especially if there is a fight or a quarrel or a misunderstanding in the marriage of these couples. And after listening to both sides, he would then decide who is at fault. From his judgment, he will conclude as to who did wrong and who did right. And after that, you would think he would probably settle the issue and come to a resolution. He would pick up a cane and flog the person mercilessly. Yes, Reverend King picked up a cane to flog either a husband or a wife who he thought was at fault in a quarrel, he would flog the guilty party strokes of the cane either on the back or on the butt, as though they were in secondary school. Now, these couples are grown-up men and women, adults, not little children playing school. How did this man think it was alright to pick up a cane to flog a full-grown adult, all because he thought they were at fault in their marriage problems? Should we blame him, or should we blame these couples who go to present themselves for this man to pry in their private business and then take actions as though he was the parent of this grown-up adult married couple? It's very funny that this man was just a pastor or an overseer of a small church, and yet he had this power. Could you imagine if this man had had several branches? Could you imagine if this man had lived to expand his church? I mean, he's alive now, but he's behind bars. Imagine if he was out here building branches and building headquarters. That would be a lot of couples receiving so many strokes of the cane. So basically, that was how he ran his church. If he thought you had sinned, he would punish you for it by flogging you. That was his way of ridding you of your sin. That was his way of purifying you. That was his way of making you better in the sight of God. It was also said that he was generous and financially helped members of his church who were struggling. I guess that balances things up. He gets to flog you when you sin, and when you need financial help, he also gets to help you. I guess that would be a good reason for members of his congregation to not want to leave. That would be a good reason for members of his congregation to take the strokes of the cane whenever he finds them guilty of sin. After all, if they need a bag of rice, he would be there to provide it. If they need money for their children's school fees, he would be there to provide it. So he might as well be there to flog you when you sin. I mean, how many strokes of the cane can you take for a bag of rice? How many strokes of the cane can you take for your child's school fees? How many strokes of the cane can you take to pay a hospital bill? I guess when members of his church weigh the options, 12 strokes of the cane wouldn't look like a lot, right? But guess what may look like a lot? A gallon of petrol and a matches. The balance of Reverend King's financial help and self-proclaimed punishers of sinners did not exactly hold its stamina on the 22nd of July, when he thought that 7 members of his church had sinned and decided that in his usual fashion, he was going to punish them. Now, the details surrounding how he got to find out that these 7 members had fornicated is not very clear. Some sources claim that these members were the ones who went to confess to him. Some other sources claim that he caught these 7 members in the act. Another source claimed that other church members were the ones who reported these 7 members for the sin of fornicating. However, from what I found out, there is a chance that all 7 members that he set ablaze lived in his house with him, which is most likely possible that he may have caught them in the act, or at least caught one and forced that one to confess and mention the names of the others. It was 6 females and 1 male. Apparently, the male in the center of these 7 members is the one believed to have done something with all 6 of the female members. Now, although the pictures of these 7 victims are not in publication, they are not in circulation, they are nowhere to be found, their names were given to be Kosi, Chiejile, Jessica, Anne, Vivian, Kelechi, and Susan. So regardless of how he got to know, or regardless of if these members lived with him or not, when it came time to discipline them in his usual fashion, he decided to try another approach from what he usually did, which was the use of cane for the sinners. This time around, he probably took a cue from Credonia Mwerinde and decided that instead of using a cane, he was going to use fire. And boy, did he use fire on all 7 victims. My confusion here is, did the members see this coming? I guess maybe they were hoping to be flogged, but if someone pours petrol on you, you have to know that it could only get worse from there. I guess this was some sort of mind control. I guess he had a hold of his members to the point where I would not even doubt if one of them was the one who brought the petrol to be doused on them because they felt, or they were programmed to think, that they deserved it. When people begin to see their pastors and preachers as God himself, they tend to forget that he's a mere human being like them too. To the members, Reverend King was like God. He was the Almighty to them. If it wasn't evident in that moment where he set 7 members of his church on fire because they fornicated, it would be evident many years later after this tragedy goes to court. But from what we know, it was said that after the 7 members were arraigned before him in his residence and he concluded that they were all guilty of fornication, he got fear and doused it on them. It's unclear if they were kneeling still or standing still to let themselves be set ablaze, but that was what happened eventually, because after he poured them the fuel, he took his time to light a matches on them. It was said the first one he lit did not light, but it was the second one that eventually consumed these 7 people in fire. They weren't tied, they weren't locked up, they were all standing still, waiting to be burnt. Immediately, they were also rushed to the hospital. And I guess it was in the hospital that their eyes eventually opened that it was not God who set them on fire. By the time they saw their skin scaling and burning, they realized that this couldn't have been God's plans for them. The story went viral. Police immediately started investigation. Reverend King denied it. However, after one of the victims succumbed to her injuries and died in the hospital, that was when everyone knew that this case had gotten out of hand. The other 6 victims were said to be treated and they all survived. And these 6 victims would play key witnesses in court during the trial. Reverend King was immediately arrested and he was charged with 6 counts of attempted murder and the murder of a young woman by the name of Ann Uzo. In September of 2006, he was arraigned in court and the charges were read to him, in which he pled not guilty and basically claimed that he didn't do it. According to his version of what happened that day, he claimed that he had just finished closing from church and was speaking to members of his congregation when he heard this said member by the name of Ann Uzo yelling and shouting with fire all over her body. He claimed he was the one who helped her to the tap to turn off the fire. He claimed he was the one who took her to the hospital and that he was not the one who set her on fire. He basically just assumed that this fire fell from heaven upon the woman. And yes, I know the song Send Down Fire, the Holy Ghost Fire, but I don't know if that was the song this man was thinking of when he gave that claims that he did not know how this woman got engulfed in flames. He just saw her running with fire all over her body. Then who sent down the fire? We know it's not the Holy Ghost. The claims were just to present himself as innocent. However, that claim did not hold water in court because several witnesses came forward to testify against him. And majority of these witnesses were the 6 surviving victims he had set ablaze. And when these victims came forward to testify in court, boy did they give a very shocking revelation about the Reverend King himself. When these victims came forward to testify, they revealed so much more, so much dark secret, so much atrocities that this man was committing behind closed doors. It was like, wait, I thought we came here to hear about how he set you guys on fire. Now, how come we are going deep into this? How did we get here? Well, I guess the court needed to know what kind of person he was. I guess the court needed to know what he did behind closed doors that may have led to this extent of wickedness that he showed upon 7 members of his congregations who were most likely living with him at the time the incident happened. What could have led to this incident? What was happening behind closed doors? Why was he so angry at these people to the point that he had to use fire and matches to set them ablaze? Was he doing the Lord's job, or was this very personal to him? So one of the first witnesses to come out to testify was the girl named Kelechi. She claimed that Reverend King held her in bondage in his house. According to her, he made her a reverend sister. So he was the one who ordained her as a reverend sister. He was Reverend King while she was Reverend Queen. So in the church, people saw her as the female assistant to Reverend King. So she was basically the queen to the king. She said he made her take a covenant not to ever leave him and to always remain dedicated to him and the church, in which she took part in the covenant. You see, if she is going to be queen and he's going to be king, they would have to do what kings and queens do. She claimed she was made into a sex slave by Reverend King and would eventually get pregnant 5 different times. And when each of these pregnancies was said to have happened, she claimed that Reverend King would ask her to get rid of the pregnancy. 5 different times she got pregnant and 5 different times she took them off. Even when the doctor told her that her womb is at risk and she brought it back to Reverend King, she recalled Reverend King being excited that her womb was going to be compromised. In his words, he was like, "Oh, That would be good, sir. That way you would stop getting pregnant for me. Kelechi went on to tell the court that Reverend King was very violent to her, that he would beat her up whenever she talked about going home to her family, to the point that Reverend King sent 200,000 naira to Kelechi's family as bride price. It was said that Reverend King sent the sister of Kelechi the money to give to the father as a way of paying bride price for the daughter who was held captive in his house and being used as a sex slave. According to Kelechi, the father rejected the money because basically that is not how they marry off daughters. Another witness was Vivian, and when Vivian came to take the stand, it was said that she corroborated the claims that Reverend King was the one who set them ablaze, and he was the one who set the late Anne on fire that eventually caused her death. It's not clear if Vivian made any direct personal claims like Kelechi made, but it was said that Vivian's own testimony in the court did not exactly end well for her, because when the judge called for recess and everyone was evacuating the courtroom, it was said that Reverend King targeted her in the crowd, and when he got close to her, he dashed her a very sound slap to her face. It's unclear why he was upset, but clearly he probably felt betrayed. Maybe he had thought all of them would change their story in the court, but for Vivian to come on the stand to take the side of the other victims, I guess that offended him to the point that he felt the need to give her a very, very dirty slap. The next victim to come out to take the stand and testify was Susan. Now, Susan was the one who gave a very clear description of what happened that very day that Reverend King set the members on fire. Susan claimed to have been working with Reverend King for over 6 years before the incident. She was hired as a cleaner and as a cook. However, she was not your ordinary average cleaner and cook. According to her, her contract with Reverend King, or her covenant with Reverend King, was that she would clean, cook his food, and serve him his food while naked. And according to Susan, she did all of these things the way he wanted. She cleaned his house, cooked his food, and served him his meals in his bedroom without wearing any clothes. That was what she did almost every day for 6 years. However, on that said day, the 22nd of July 2006, I guess she probably had enough. From what she remembered, she was in the boys' quarters having a nap when Kelechi, the Reverend Queen, came to call her to tell her that Reverend King was calling her. Now, when she got to where Reverend King was in the sitting room, she saw the other 6 members or 5 members kneeling down. Now, Kelechi, who came to call her, was not kneeling down. She was just there, standing near Reverend King. Remember, she's Reverend Queen. Take note of this Kelechi, because for some reason, I did not exactly trust her throughout my research. There was just something about her that made me feel like she might just be as guilty as her king, even though she too was a victim. So, it was said that when Susan came out and saw that all the other employees were kneeling down, Reverend King confronted her with a slap, beat her, and just kept punching her. She did not even know why she was called, but the moment she got there, she received it hot. She received slaps, punches, kicks, and was made to kneel down with the other 6 victims. According to her, the whole case was over the boy, who was also an employee. I don't know what his role was, but I'm sure maybe he was the one doing the male job in the compound. He was the one probably turning on the gen, he was the one cleaning the cars, he was the one running errands for Reverend King. So it was being said that Reverend King claimed that the boy had intercourse with all the female staff members in the compound. And when Susan came, she said that Chiejile was lying. But then Reverend King said that Chiejile had actually confessed that he had done something with all of you. And it was said that Reverend King was so angry and furious that he sent Kelechi, his queen, to go and get fuel. Now, Kelechi was the one who went to get the fuel. And when Kelechi went to get the fuel, Reverend King told her that the fuel is not enough, in which she went to get more fuel in a larger plastic container. After Kelechi brought the fuel and gave it to Reverend King, it was said that Reverend King told them that they should leave the sitting room, that he does not want to burn his rug, and he marched them outside the compound. And then Reverend King ordered Kelechi to pour them the fuel, and according to Susan, Kelechi poured them the fuel. Yes, under the orders of Reverend King. But regardless, she still poured them the fuel. That was when it was said that Reverend King struck the first match and threw at them, but the wind blew that off before it could get to them. Wow. It's so surprising to me that these people were still kneeling down waiting to be set on fire. How do you get mind controlled to this point? How do you get so collected and trapped by a mere mortal to this point where you've been doused with petrol and you're still kneeling down or standing there waiting to be set on fire? Even after the first match went off, these people could have seen that he was serious. I mean, in my head, I would think maybe they were like, he's bluffing, or they were like, he's not going to do it, or if they beg some more, he would forgive them, or he was just threatening them. But after he threw the first match, that is all the signs you need to know that this man was serious. That should have been the point these people could have run. However, it was said that they didn't run. They remained there until he lit the second match and threw at them. That was when they all engulfed in flames. But according to Susan, she somehow managed to escape. She said that she was not harmed by the fire. She ran back into the boys' quarter where she went to hide herself and wear her clothes until she later heard that Anne had been taken to the hospital. Anne was the one who got the worst of it. She was the one who got most of the fuel, and she was the one who probably did not resist or fight back. Maybe she probably felt very guilty about fornicating. It's very possible that she may have been the one who might have done the fornication that Reverend King was upset about. And so, for some reason, she was so sorry about the sin that she probably felt she deserved the burning. Because when the other people caught flames, they somehow struggled to get it off their bodies. They somehow struggled to fight it off. But Anne's own was very severe. She burned to a point of no return. It was in this moment that Susan realized that the spell has been cast out of her eyes. According to her, after the incident, after Anne was taken to the hospital, she left the compound. She ran away from the compound, and her eyes opened for some sort, and she realized that she had been free from the spell of Reverend King. So it was this testimony that the judge eventually used in deciding their judgment. For 4 months, this trial continued. That is from September of 2006 to January of 2007. And in January of 2007, Reverend King was found guilty of attempted murder and the murder of Anne Uzo, in which he was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder, and after he finished serving that 20 years, he would eventually be sentenced to death by hanging for the death of Anne Uzo. So that is it, guys. That was how Reverend King was found guilty and sentenced to death. The end. Well, not really. This is the beginning of what was about to come next. But before we continue, share your country flag down below in the comment section to let us know where you're watching from. Like this video, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on your notification button so whenever there is a new video, you will be the first to get notified. So after he was sentenced to 20 years and eventual death by hanging, you would think this would be the end of Reverend King. But for some reason, this was the beginning of Reverend King. Like I said before, no one knew him before the scandal. He wasn't famous. His church wasn't anything. His church wasn't big. However, after the trial and after the scandal, members of his church began to lift his name high. It was said that when he was sentenced to death, his church members threatened the country that if their holiness was ever killed, that they would wage war in the country and no one would be at peace. These were the threats the church members were giving to the country. Don't kill him. Don't touch him. Because if you do, there will be war in this country. Wow. And you would think they would stop there with those empty threats. But they did not stop there. They promoted the church and increased his fan base. In fact, his congregation was said to grow in numbers at the time. In 2014, his church members were said to have purchased many pages of a newspaper and dedicated those pages to celebrating Reverend King. In those pages, he was called the Holiness, he was called Perfect, he was compared to Jesus, and his coming back from prison was being awaited like the second coming of Jesus Christ. And every 26th of February, it was said that these church members would also make celebratory publications in newspapers just celebrating him on his birthday. Aside that, it was said that members frequently visited him in prison. Some of the female members, however, did more than visiting him in prison. Some of them serviced his human needs there in prison too. This was revealed by several prison wardens who caught him in the act, sleeping with various female members of his congregation. Within this period, it was also said that Reverend King appealed the sentencing, still standing on his innocence, hoping that when this case goes to the Supreme Court, he would be found not guilty. However, in 2016, the Supreme Court would listen to his case again and they would uphold his death sentence and find him guilty still. So this was his last shot at freedom, but for some reason, the court did not agree with him. He was found guilty of murder and his death sentence was upheld. This was not good news to his church members, who still continued threatening the country that whatever it is, if you guys hurt him, if you guys kill him, we will bring this country down. But not many people found those threats to hold any weight, since that it's just a small group of people. But I'm not going to underestimate them. I mean, there is so much damage 200 members can do. In 2018, something very unusual happened. This was a period of election campaign, so the candidates were expressing their interest in running for presidency against 2019. So one morning in 2018, it was said that Lagosians woke up to numerous posters of Reverend King contesting for presidency. There were so many posters of Reverend King going around saying, "Vote Reverend King for president in 2019. This came as a surprise to many people who were like, isn't this guy supposed to be in prison? How come he's campaigning for presidency? I mean, in Nigeria, nothing is impossible, but this one was sort of a stretch. It was said that these posters were investigated and it turned out that it was members of his church who did it as a way of celebrating him. It wasn't like he was actually running for presidency. Up to this very day of making this video, Reverend King is still being celebrated by his church members. It's unclear if they are still doing their yearly publication of celebrating him, but I wouldn't be surprised if they still do. The church is still currently running. It's unclear how many members they have now, but for the time being, they've gone on a low. Not much is being heard of them. Their 15 minutes of fame has probably elapsed, and not many people so much talk about them anymore, apart from now that we are talking about them. He's currently still serving his 20-year sentence for the attempted murder, and after that, he would eventually serve his death sentence by hanging. The church members are hopeful and they believe somehow that he is going to pull through this and come back home to them. It's been said that in his church, along with the second coming of Jesus Christ, the other thing these church members look forward to is the second coming of Reverend King. So thank you guys for watching. But I would like to hear your thoughts on this story. I would like to hear your thoughts, especially on Reverend Queen Kelechi, the one who poured the fear on the victims. But the fact that she too was a victim of being a sexual slave in the hands of Reverend King, she wasn't tried for her role in dousing these people with fear. I mean, I would think she played a role in the death of Anne. But since it's being said that she was under his spell, or she was under his captivity, or she was acting at the orders of him, I guess maybe that was why she got a slap on the wrist, or she really got nothing at all. She wasn't treated as an accomplice, she was treated as a victim too. But from what we know, since she was mentioned as the 7 people poured fuel on, she wasn't poured fuel on. I guess it's actually 6 victims, because Kelechi herself was not doused with fuel. She was the Reverend Queen. She was the one who did the dousing. But for the fact that she was a victim of his captivity, she wasn't treated as an accomplice. But personally, I think she should have been treated as an accomplice. So let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from, and also don't forget to like this video, share with your friend, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so whenever there is a new video, you'll be the first to know. Thank you for watching.